do your own brain surgery. But my background was that I was working for the top producer in the country as his associate. And so I knew how to get into novels and deal with agents and deal with attorneys. So I thought, there we go. So you can sit down. We could sit down.
Do you want us to sit down? Be comfortable.
Sit down.
I've been sitting down all day.
So what you're looking at is that when I bought the rights to Rogers Lasney's Lord of Light, I looked around town and I was thinking, well, I was asking different artists, just turn this off, what what they can do, and I wanted them to do something like Jack Kirby. And this guy would draw something for me, and I go, and then I had the idea of calling up Jack, and we liked each other because I think I was crazy enough, and I saw a kindred spirit. I really wasn't into the comics. I loved the comics, but of course I hadn't read any comics in 10 years. So it's sort of like, where did Barry come from? Well, I came from Jack's imagination, and which is what this panel is about. The segue into reality. The title of the series, by the way, is The Undiscovered Art of Jack Kirby, Architect. And that is what I'm going to be talking about at Comic-Con, and that's going to be the title of the book. But what happened was, I met a man that you might say he was holy, if one could recognize that, in the sense that he was so focused on his artwork. And I never told Jack what to do. I mean, how can you tell Jack Kirby what to do? But we discussed for many, many hours concepts, everything that's possible. Usually along the lines of what would happen if somebody discovered us. He was very upset that the establishment sent out the what was it called, the time capsule.
Was it Pioneer?
I think so. And I go, why?
Or was it that?
I think it was later.
Was it that space capsule?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did the art.
Yeah.
Did you say space?
Yes.
What hair in the crown?
Well, which should I talk from under your neck or? So, but he went. I said, well, why? I'm from the Bronx, and not that we're all dumb. Some really dumb people came from the Bronx too. But he said, no, they'll find out our location, just like that. They'll find out where we are. But he didn't say that as a psychopath. It was just, it was a true feeling. Like someone would say, well, I don't want to go downtown or in that particular part of a neighborhood because I'm A, B, C, D, E, F, G skin color. And it would be like, and I fear for my life. It was the same exact feeling. Well, maybe we should just, So what we did, at the time, I was building a theme park. seemed like a good idea at the time, actually. And it may continue to be a good idea. But and the reason I'm talking about reality, and it's a good subject, a good title, is because I think the culture that we're all living in right now, the problems we're solving right now, the idiots in government who seem to be the same idiots they were 40 years ago. But we're dealing with power. We're dealing with the idea of how we're being controlled, maybe mentally or neurologically. I mean, there's plenty of research that proves what was happening, for example, with the secret group that is around the Hulk and around all those guys. They were experimenting, the CIA were experimenting with psychic powers, and they just couldn't control it. They had, a lot of guys had big marks to be able to analyze the shape of stuff across the seas. But some guys were great, some guys were not great. It's called remote viewing. And I took a course about 10, 12 years ago, and it's quite fascinating. But Jack was writing about it, and it really was there. And it is there now, I believe.
Well, I think that Jack and everything he did at the beginning of his career as a creator, whether it was war, cowboys, romance, basically was fighting a war against evil and unknown evil.
Yes.
And I think that's how he may have subconsciously dealt with things that affected him in his life and resulted in this genius ability to create worlds and people and gods.
Well, that's it. You know, when we say gods, the gods that he was creating, these were normal people. He was already there. When I met him in 1977, he had did the Eternals in what, 75, 76?
About, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why the first drawing he did has a lot of Mayan aspects to it, of which, part of which is the reality part. But that's right. He was driven by the purity of creativity, but more than that, it was like part of life to him. The gods were real. They're real to me too, but in a different way.
Well, I think that when you met Jack and the discussions you had with him, there was an opportunity for him to express himself creatively, and not have some corporate structure with all these reasons to correct and change and go sideways with his creations. He could create pure ideas. And I think that you helped him, gave him an opportunity to do that when you came to him. And
no, that's true, because it was at that point. Now all of this is unbeknownst to me, but still, it was, as I discovered it later, and all the warring factions, and what he was still smarting from having been literally insulted, in my opinion, by DC executives. I'm not going to get into that, but that's just my opinion. You know, it's always that way. You know, you're thrown out of one place and then you do well and they go, ah, my friend, we always loved you. You know, that's just the strange part of human nature, which we try to evolve from. At least I do anyway. And, you know, because he was real. He just wanted someone to be real with him. And he, in that sense. So I found myself just tearing myself and my imagination apart, but I didn't feel that I had to prove anything. And I certainly wasn't there as a fan. I was there as an executive. I was spending money. You know, it's just like, and then I'd see Jack, we'd get one of these drawings, and then I'd go out and talk to developers and architects and finance. Anyway, there's a video I just discovered about a week ago, made by some guys called, what are they again? Did I send it to you? Cross Panel or something like this. It'll be on my website, but they had an interesting perspective in that Jack sort of was just basically interdimensional. And they saw me, and I never even thought about it that way, as the same character in Lord of Light, because the intensity and the entirety of my objective was to build this theme park to invite all these scientists there. And of course, every scientist I talked to really liked it. And of course, every banker I talked to, they loved it because they saw income streams, and I would suddenly switch gear to tax shelter and objectives and things like this. The reality was, it didn't happen. Reality at that time is that it just vanished, and like half the people that I had worked with went to jail. Well, they were under my supervising producer, and then it all went away. I'm talking about from my perspective, until the Freedom of Information Act came along and revealed that John Chambers, who was doing makeup consulting for me, and he brought in his #1 guy, who I think his name is Maurice Dime. His claim to fame was Spock's ears, you know, why not? And they were together, and the next thing I know, I found out, and this is when I would key the video, but there's no video, for whatever reasons. And I find out, I'm looking at this show, and here's this guy from the CIA, and he holds up the drawing of one of the drawings, colored, which I had given them the rights to do, and didn't have any idea why they wanted to buy the rights. Well, we're going to show it on television, on some kind of show. So all I did was ask them to put an extra 0 on what their original offer was, and I totally forgot about the thing for about 6 months. And then there's this guy, key the video, I stole the script from Lord of Light. And I went, damn. And I went to my attorneys, big attorney friend, who I was doing patent work with, because I'm actually, although I'm not a schooled inventor, I'm an engineer. I have 2 internet technology patents, from 20 years ago. Identity verification systems and e-commerce systems through, well, there's a whole technical term about it, but it's basically virtualizing. And I began to wonder recently, well, maybe there's a connection with all the clouds and the stuff and what I was doing then, because I started, just the other night, I started to look at the patent, and there was this whole list of companies that had used my patents that I didn't even know about. And that's part of this reality thing. There's, you know, where do we lay, you know, we born, we live, we die. Where do we put our thumbprint? And that's my question. I'm serious, and I don't care. So I'll ask the question, and I hope everyone asks that question. But that's what we discussed. That's what, you know, and you would get these drawings. They had no basis in reality.
Well, I had, you know, I get a call from Jack, and he says, I got this project I want you to work on. It's not for Marvel, it's not DC, and the check will come someone else. That's it. That's all I was told. And as it turns out, the only people that ever saw the pencils to this remarkable art was his wife Roz and me. Because when Barry first saw the finished art, it was already inked and in lettering. But I was so busy doing everything Jack sent me that I never had a chance to say, well, what is this for? You know, but it was kind of obvious that this might be a theme park or an amusement park or something. But I just continued to everything Jack sent me. I worked on it. And it was, God, it wasn't, how many years was it before we met?
1993, I think.
You know, and it's like, I got these checks from someone named Barry Geller, but it was like this was Jack's client, and I had no idea what it was all about. But the more I learned, and of course, I can remember at Disney in the commissary in the morning, sitting there talking to everybody about our hostages in Iran, and not knowing that I would years later find out that the work that Jack did and that I was involved with would ultimately result in the release of the hostages. I walked into my favorite Western restaurant bar in Jacksonville, Oregon, and I knew Sue, the gal that ran the place, because I drew napkins for customers when I would have a drink. And I came in and she said, have you seen the movie Argo? And I said, not yet, but I do have a connection. And I told her what it was, and she said, Argo, frack yourself. But it's funny.
But that's what they originally named it from. Not from you know, the Jason and the Argonauts. It was meant Argo, fuck yourself. That's the in-joke from the CIA.
Yeah.
One day, I'm having a production meeting in my house with a couple of guys, some technicians, and John was there, and we were discussing different actors for the role of Brahma. And this guy, you know, suddenly John says, oh, don't worry about it, I've invented some really great stuff to make people a lot younger. And I use it with the CIA. He actually said that, and there was four of us there, and we turned around and go, yeah, right, John. And that was it. Never brought up again. But, I mean, what? So there it is. We see this show, and the guy's holding it up, and then it all ravels. You know, it unravels. You know, he wrote a book called The Master of Disguise, and he was taking around Hollywood. See, this is another reality shift of suddenly how, call it karma. You know, a lot of people don't know what really that is, most stuff, but it doesn't matter because that's karma. Never mind. So, I'm joking today from lack of sleep probably, but he wrote this book, he tried to take it around Hollywood, sell it for $1 million, and he was, well, you know, very credible. And then there was a documentary being made on me, and the woman who had found me through the original interview of the spy, and she had given her all her work and notes to this more seasoned writer who said, I'll give you a plug in Wyatt magazine. And of course, you know, and then the article was bought for $30,000. Who would want to buy his book now for $1 million? So that's the intricacies of Hollywood. What's that?
They probably rain, you know, because we don't get much here in California. They have an emergency alert, it's 2 drops.
Whoopie-doo. So turn around and discover that, and that is in my article in Heavy Metal, that the CIA had used, and you know the story, the artwork for Lord of Light that no one ever knew about, because there was that legal problems. Well, essentially, my supervising producer got arrested and the mayor and half the city council of Aurora, Colorado. So they kind of put a damper on things, you know, kind of put a little damper on things. But I still managed to buy the rights out because my option was up. And we were famous. We were, I mean, in the sense of under life, under a new reality. And the one that's up here, and the small one, that's called the Terminal of the Gods. And the reason I brought that here today is that I just finished new coloring of the first two. And that's also a new reality right here. And if you're, I'm going to segue back and forth, hope you guys don't mind. But how this thing has mushroomed is from...
Well, you know,
They like the thing at the end.
I've been rereading this last line, and what you're talking about, it all relates, but it's our consciousness has been changed by Jack Kirby's work.
That's correct.
What is unknown to many people is it was Jack Kirby and his discussions with Barry and the artwork that came out of those discussions that the CIA swiped and told the Iranians these were the sets and designs, pre-production designs for a movie that was going to be done so the Canadians could do their things and our hostages could be freed. And this is something that affected everyone, even though they didn't know how much Jack Kirby had to do with it. And the fact that we live in a world now where in motion pictures, we are seeing Jack's consciousness on the screen all the time, the stuff that came from his fertile mind, and the only, as far as I'm concerned, sad thing is that all of this stuff, the Lord of Light, all of this character art, these designs, and all of this comic book and other work has influenced all of our consciousness. And the shame is that Jack Kirby's name should be, in my opinion, so much more important and revered other than the fact that he was the king of comic books.
And that's where, if I segue into that, that's my purpose in life today, is not to make a buck off of the IP that I have. I mean, believe me, I could have sold this thing. But no, I want to see just that take place, to occur, because people have been looking at it in the wrong factor, in that it's not comics. It was architectural. Every drawing he did, yes, production design, but what is the production design? I mean, you can have film production design, generally is not necessarily architectural, maybe 10% of the time based on the picture. Good. Thank you. And
Unlike 4 by 10.
yeah, send him the bill. So, but in this case, we did production designs for a theme park. I had this vision, and that's how crazy I was when I was 30, 31. How can you not be totally crazy when you're talking to a creative person like Jack Kirby?
So it's you and Jack, and what came out of this.
Yes.
You then got people like Ray Bradbury and others involved because they saw and felt the same thing that comes out of your and Jack's consciousness, that I think Jack in many ways was always dealing with gods and human gods, a mental evolution. Of course, I could use 10 years of therapy, but I'm just a firm believer that thanks to Barry, the world was exposed to this unlimited Jack Kirby creativity, and no one to say you can't do that, it can't be done. And the one nice thing about this all taking so long as we now live in the age when it is all absolutely possible to realize this dream of your and Jack's.
And that's what we're gonna do. And you know, he's part of, you know, everything I do, he's like a major stockholder. And, you know, because why not? This started out where, I just want to give like one little quick thing on this. It started out as your drawing, that one on the, it's usually the one on the end. And then the artist, this is from Unbox, the artist sculpted, 3D modeled, and then you came along, they sent me the pictures of it, and he did his further sketches. Can you see it up there? You see how he, you know?
Rule.
And then I sent this back to them, and then they went nuts for about 8 months with 163 masks, they told me, where they originally had to create it by hand at first. And I'm going, why is this taking so long? And, you know, and they, calm down, Barry. But here is the result. This is the reality. This is what we're talking about now. There's Mike's lines, and they're the same lines here. This is the production model, the variant, and if you look through it, the strange plastic, his lines are inside of it. And so the plan is to take the Lord of Light drawings and find every way I can to say, hey, this is what we did, and there's unbelievable architectural perception and perspective in these things, and I'm just here to really announce that. And we're discovering things. Here, let me get up for a second. How are we doing on time?
20 minutes.
Oh, then we talk a lot more. Or he can, anyway. So this was the original drawing. And then I just took that and was having someone play with the colors. And it was sort of like pulling it all out. But I'm very happy with the result. And that's our current thing. And so they gave us this, a picture of this, which came from that. Mr. Royer, in his very genius way, I send it up to him on 400 Strathmore, and
Well, it was a case of taking these three-dimensional photographs, these three-dimensional sculptures, and taking Jack's line work from his impressionistic style and translating it to the front of these models
right.
to see how it would work. And then for me, the interesting challenge was then creating the backs, which Jack had never drawn. And it's like, Mike, how do you think Jack would have done this?
400 drawings, one of my collector friends went through as a favor and only found one where someone's back was to the viewer. And it was some bad guy, Thor, that gotten rid of, and you actually saw him walking in front of And so, but that's what they did, and this is the genius of Mike Royer over here. And this now they have a manufacturing process. The reason I wanted to bring these, well, I also thought we're going to have a whole box of these, and some pesky news about a virus. just joking. But no, but really, it's terrible over there, and you know, so they've been closed down for a month, and it's just the way it is. So, but it's soon, it's soon, and that's what we want to do. We want to it occurs to me that there's so much here that people can be trained from. The young people can train about to see how a master approached things. And my original purpose with Science Fiction Land was to expand the imagination of children. That was my mission statement. In the 70s, everyone had a mission statement.
Well, and Barry is nice enough to not be a pitchman for his own table. So I'll tell you that if you go by his table in the vendor's room or towards the back of the building, you'll see how his vision and Jack's artwork has been translated into beautiful collector's pins and all kinds of future projects that are mined for things for people to experience and have in their hands and on their chests. The work of Jack Kirby, which resulted as Barry meeting with him, and believe me, no matter where we go in this world, we are experiencing the consciousness of Jack Kirby, whether we realize it or not.
There's a certain integrity, certain morals that the good guy maybe gets bent out of shape a bit, but he's still, I'm Iron Man, never dies. You know, that kind of thing. And you know, that it's good drama. It goes back to the Romans and to the Greeks. Socratic. That's what Jack really, you know, you wouldn't know it, but he was a master of something like this. This was like maybe 3 inches on the original drawing. And I just had an inspiration. Can everyone see it? His like perspective continued all the way down to these little people, to a nightclub, and this is like 300, maybe a half a mile away from the beginning, and he's still working that way. So part of our mission here, our reality, is to get this kind of mastership. That's what you're talking about. That's what has changed the reality, because anyone else has had that experience of saving, whose artwork saved those people's lives. It's a fact. and was used in a governmental way. So I just want to continue that in all the ways that we can. So it's easier.
Well, I'm the lucky guy that got to sit at my drawing board with this artwork, many of which were almost bigger than the size of my drawing board. And this was probably only the second time that I worked on Jack Kirby stuff that was not oriented towards his comic book characters or the actual comic book pages. And the first thing I ever did with Jack that was pure Jack Kirby was his gods drawings. And there was, before they were published with these, and then the second thing was this. And to me, it's like it affected me from the standpoint that I was working with a man that not only had inspired me since I was a kid in the Simon and Kirby comic books of my youth, and I was working with him now, but the effect that he had on me as a creator. I mean, after Jack, I started 21 years of drawing Disney character art. But if you want to come by Barry's table and my table, I'll show you my artwork, and I'll show you how Jack Kirby influenced me with funny animals. You know, as artists, I think we all learn from him. As creators, we learn from him. Well, I'm lost in the consciousness of Jack Kirby.
That's why, you know, I think I gave two panels on the conscious, you know, but what is, see, then it gets mystical. That's why there's a certain mysticism, meaning that which is not known. And then there's also a mysticism of ritual practice, which is different. But there's a certain mysticism in the fact that the CIA, Mendez, selected this. I mean,
Which is a nice word for stole.
yeah, I spoke to my attorneys. Can't we just sue the CIA? And they laughed like that, for 10 minutes. You know, right, okay, I did. But somehow he passed through the membrane of what our imagination, what is the reality is that he imagined life into existence. I firmly believe that. And it actually comes out, that could be very much how people save diseases and change their bodies and change things around that way, because they imagine it into existence. And I think that's really that's with Jack's consciousness. I mean, like, there should be ways of exploring his work, I believe, and that's one reason to get more of this thing out there, of what it really meant to design a theme park, if you're Jack Kirby. I mean, you how long did you work for Disney?
21 and a half years. And nobody really knows that. It's like if I have any celebrity, I worked with Jack Kirby for 10 years, you know. He called me.
And see, Disney is now shaping the world with images.
With much of Jack Kirby's work.
Yes. That's correct. So I'm really proposing, and that's what I'm love to do, is different people around the world, maybe we can form a group and look at how all these things may actually get out there. It's worth the half hour I spent to a kid this morning telling him about Jack. We knew a little bit, oh yeah, Jack, but he didn't know anything about Lord of Light. What's that? And he really wanted to know. He even bought some pins and some drawings. So it's serious. I believe more and more people, if we can take Jack's consciousness, things will change a little bit in the world. That's my utter, complete belief. Yes?
I'm just curious, do copies of the pencils exist anywhere? Just to see the evolution of the artwork.
No. Not that I know of. I think he's the only one who saw them.
So Jack didn't copy them because he had a copier,
We
right?
had a copier. Did he?
Well, like I said, I was told very little. And outside of Roz, his wife, Roz and I are the only people that ever saw the pencil work. And I was always as faithful to Jack as I could be. I didn't ink Jack, I finished Jack's work in ink, which I think is the way Jack would have done it if he'd had the time and the interest. You know, and I'm proud of the fact that...
That's why you were the best thinker.
Well, Jack was very political. When people say, who's your favorite anchor? You say, well, you know, Joe has this and Frank has this strengths and so on and so forth. But after he left comic books, he just said Mike Reuter. And I love Joe Sinnott, and I don't want to change the subject, but if you ever want to know the difference between Joe Sinnott and Mike Reuter, and you understand the dichotomy of the motion picture studios in its golden age, Joe Sinnott inked Jack Kirby, MGM. I inked Jack Kirby, Warner Brothers. And in comic books, the correlation between Warner Brothers and Jack is he put on the page what they did on the screen was just enough to sell the story. And then here he had an opportunity to create remarkable stuff, to tell a story, and to stimulate imagination, and I wish I knew how to speak, but
You're doing great.
and I'm just pleased that I was a part of something that I found out years later, in one part of our world, was extremely influential. And I'm sorry that in the movie they don't use Jack's art. They use a burnt out actor
Chicken scratches, yeah.
to be the artist.
And they cut that because the Kirby estate said no, that he had to go back to me. And since he already was done with me, he just took the whole thing out. One thing I really want to mention is that when I was interviewed by, this is after the film came out, I was interviewed by what I call Sons of the Revolutionary, this one guy, but he was this big shot, wrong word, he was a cultural savant. He's works with one of the big museums in Europe these days, but his parents were there at that time, and he interviewed me about, he did this piece on how Hollywood has raped their country for 50 years or more, the whole Persian thing. And so they put it in there, and it's in French. But I asked him at the end of the interview, which I wish I had recorded, what was his favorite drawing? And he immediately said, that one, Terminal of the Gods, the first one. And I went, why? It was actually, for me, at that time, from, not the bestseller, as a poster. And he said, because it represented to us the leaving of the Shah and the return of our holy work, Terminal of the Gods. And that is how Jack, I'm not sure who named it. I think I may have named it. I'm pretty sure I did, actually. But that's the kind of thing I want to, I'm dedicated to push forward to that frame of consciousness, to transform reality through art.
What you're seeing at the table here is an absolutely beautiful example of passion.
Thank you very much.
Is our time up?
Okay.
I'm applauding you guys for
Thanks,
being part of it.
thanks everyone for coming and sharing. It's a very interesting subject.
So did Roger's Velocity have any input into
None.
any of the?
See, when you sell it, you sold it.
Yeah.
I can complain about others doing that to Lord of Light. Well, when I optioned it, I can do anything you want. So, but no, he liked it. I talked to him once, and, oh, great.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys.
I kept waiting for the flash.
So good.
So,
Good job.
removed from the current technology I am.
Removed? I want to talk about your technology. Brushes or you use